I think schedule data is probably one of the most underutilized sets of data in all construction for sure, because there is just so much information contained in a schedule. When you consider, the scope of all the task, the time associated with all of that scope, all the logical relationships that show the interaction between the scope, all the projections, the planned dates, actual dates, starting dates, all that kind of stuff. There's just so much in there. So it really comes down to, what are the components, what are the key performance indicators that can really help shape and help drive actionable decisions, right? I mean, like I said, there's just so many different charts that I see all the time. So in the last few years in my work, put together schedule charts and programs for projects and, entire organizations, that's been one of the more interesting things about what I've been able to do and participate in is, get involved in summits and interaction with schedulers that, have been doing it for a long time and developing a good list of, what I would call a fairly comprehensive list of KPIs, or at least significant KPIs that are very actionable, things that an individual scheduler or an organization can see a number or see some kind of a chart or whatever and actually take action on it or mean something, right? And so that's the bottom line of this presentation. And what I'm going to be presenting are these 8 KPIs that are, I think, very, very significant, very easy to manage and very easy to take action against. There's other KPIs that are in the market that are very good as well, but they may require additional information that most schedules have. For example, you look at the schedule SPI, that incorporates cost data or dollar values with schedule progress. But I didn't include some of those in here just because a lot of people don't cost load their schedules or they're not capable of doing it. These are KPIs that are you can extract from a schedule. You can do it manually if you want, but we'll go through those. And where I think this is important, I use this quote quite a bit, and I think I saw this quote probably one of the very first scheduling conferences I went to, participated in 35 years ago, I think. And it is a quote by Victor Hugo that talks about how important it is to put a plan together, right? And it helps bring a thread through the complexities of the most busy day, right? And then he goes on to say where, the time is surrendered merely to the, change of things, of incidents, everything lies together in one chaos. In other words, if you don't have a plan in place, it's chaotic. And so that's where I think these KPIs are so important. It gives you an opportunity as a project manager, project executive, or whatever, to identify some key things that can help bring order to chaotic situations. Projects can become so chaotic so quickly. I spend a lot of my time in dispute resolution, and I see mostly bad projects, it seems, and the chaos and the stress that you can just tell people, the project teams that went through a lot of stress, you could see it in their correspondence and all that kind of stuff. And so these KPIs that we're talking about, I believe, will help bring a lot of order. They're actionable things you can deal with right away. And they will help improve those chaotic situations. Once again, I think project teams can be under so much stress. It can not only affect their work life, it can impact their personal life. So I see a good scheduling tool and a good scheduling support team as a great opportunity to improve people's quality of life in general, right? So also, these KPIs can really help an organization with these what I consider to be the four main components of an organization's scheduling program. Obviously, the training, the schedule quality control, the reporting tools from a scheduling program, and then compliance with procedures, right? So good KPIs can help across in an entire organization and the entire program. And so what a lot of organizations run into with managing these types of reports are, there's so many different systems out there, whether it's the software systems that you're using. There's so many different processes that are in place. A lot of times, even processes that are driven from contract to contract, where, one contract requires a certain number of updates per month and another one requires one a month. There's just so many processes out there, so many systems out there. Visibility, having a system in place that management can see and help enforce and help support a project team. And then obviously one of the roadblocks is just having a good set of reporting tools that are just easy to use, right? I look at schedulers a lot of times as they're gatekeepers. As I mentioned, there is a lot of data in scheduling tools, and it seems like to get to that data, it's very difficult, right? That valuable data, it can be very, very difficult. So ease of use, visibility, those kind of fall into that category. So let's talk about the first one is a quality assessment. I'm going to use the schedule validation score as a quality assessment. There's a lot of good quality assessments out there. In fact, I like having a quality assessment tool where I can help manage that across my project. So I have my little dashboards where I can see across our organization, a scheduling team, I can see how our quality, if we're maintaining that standard that we have. So if you had a good quality monitoring system, you can do that. And so just, that's a good example. I've got, execution is another one we'll talk about here in a little bit. But if you have a really good, simple system where you can build these simple dashboard tools or incorporate dashboard tools to help you monitor these systems, that's a very important part of establishing what good KPIs and what makes them actionable. If I can, I'll see nice graphs, beautiful graphs all the time. I saw one just today. I'm like, that is a really sharp looking graph. The only problem is what's it telling me? What should it look like, right? And so having a good set of KPIs that you can monitor and you can graph and you can immediately see, hey, I need to, address this particular situation. So let's start off with just schedule quality. That's the number one, I think the number one KPI, key performance indicator. It kind of starts there, is having a good schedule quality. If you don't have the quality in your scheduling preparation and your schedule development, the rest of the reporting is going to have some serious defects. But schedule quality really addresses the scope, the time, and the logic or the relationships and a schedule. That's what most of your schedule quality components are centered around. Do you have your tasks broken out? Are they broken out in enough detail? Do you have all the components or the elements in your project covered? The time, what are the times associated with those, durations, lags, all that kind of stuff. and then the logic, all the interrelations, how are they tied together, and how are you performing? So, as most of you are aware, DCMA, some of these other organizations, I started publishing quality assessments. I mean, I've been scheduling for about 40 years. I was well into it for a period of time before I realized how important that kind of quality was. Fortunately, I had a pretty good set of mentors that was on the other side of the table, beating me up all the time, kind of making me learn it the hard way. But now that we have good standards that have been published, it's really been a big addition in our industry, as we've started developing it. And obviously, it's an ongoing process of developing these tools. But just using the DCMA as a good example, they talk about the DCMA 14-point guidelines. Out of DCMA, those 14 points, really the first 9 are the only ones that really deal with schedule quality, right? As far as logic, durations, schedule, all the different things. And the way I define these schedule quality components are the components in the schedule that are going to impact the calculation. In other words, they're going to impact whether or not my critical path calculation is reliable, right? So those are the things that I look at as quality. Now, DCMA, they number 10 there looks at the resources, but I know over the years, most of my clients were not very consistent at resource loading their schedules. And even if they did resource load the schedules, they rarely updated them consistently. So it's a challenge. And then those last 4 down there with the DCMA, they are items, they're comparison. Actually, you're comparing 2 schedules. So they're not really, most people think of DCMA as schedule quality, but as I mentioned, those first 9 are really the quality components. You have that resources in there. And then the last 4 are just comparisons where you miss the dates. How well did you execute? What's your critical path length and all that kind of stuff, measuring those kind of components. So what I'm going to talk about today is the development of the schedule quality assessment that I mentioned earlier, the schedule validation score, which instead of those 9, it kind of started out as that, and how it's grown, and then how those other ones have been broken out into different quality components. So from a scoring method, you can do them in spreadsheets. You can do them actually within the software nowadays. It's getting easier and easier to do the majority of these assessments within the software, or you can get an automated process. Schedule Validator is the tool that we're looking at today. And it's, just a few seconds. You can drag and drop an XER file and get your schedule validation score. And it looks something like this. And what the schedule validation scores, as I mentioned, started off as like those main 9 things that DCMA had. But the challenge with the DCMA up to this point is that you may have missing logic, right? And then they have another assessment, which is, how many or what percentage of your activities are start to start or finish to finish. In other words, overlapping activities, right? And it's just set to 5%. How they came up with 5%, I'm not sure, but that's a reasonable number. But, I know from a quality standpoint that a missing successor or missing logic ties are a little more significant risk factor in the quality of the schedule than having 6% of my activity set as a start to start, for example. So one of the things that I liked about this process, and I've been involved in helping develop the schedule validation score. It's developed through a summit process. And so every year for the last several years, we get a group of schedulers together that sit down, and most of them are running schedule departments. But we looked at it and said, hey, how much should this be worth? For example, missing predecessors is out of the 100 points of the score, missing predecessors is worth 8 points. missing successors is worth 12 points if you fail on those. And so it's all weighted, but it also looks at a lot of things that the DCMA doesn't look at. Like if you have an open finish, right? Even though you may have a successor, but nothing's tied to the finish of an activity. Well, there's a risk associated with that. It looks at activities that are just writing the data date. In other words, that's basically the same as activities not having predecessors, right? If you're just letting them get pushed out with the data date. The out of sequence. Those things, there's quite a few things that DCMA doesn't look at that over the years have been incorporated into the schedule validation score. But it makes it very easy. There's a couple things that the schedule validation score makes it really easy. Number one, it's just so easy to use, right? You don't have to be a scheduling expert. And it's just a drag and drop of an XER file, and you get it, and it gives you real simple instructions. Here's your, predecessors. Here's your activities that are running the data dates. You need to go schedule those or whatever. It gives you very, very easy instructions on what to go fix. But the thing that makes it really actionable, is for an organization to be able to say, hey, you got to have an 85, or you have to have a 90, whatever, to submit that schedule, right? So it makes it easy for an organization to say, you have to have a set number to meet that schedule. I know if a schedule has a 90, that there's not going to be, the critical path calculation is going to be pretty reliable, right? You may have some negative float. You may have some things that your schedule's getting dinged for that may not be, or that may be accurate. You may have a high percentage of activities on the critical path. You may have some things in there where you're getting dinged a bit, but the way the scoring has been developed has been very interesting. As long as I've got a 90, I can't really get a 90 if I've got some serious logic, if I've got logic issues with my schedule. So it just makes it very, very easy for organizations just to set a standard, very actionable, very easy. I get an email notice if I'm a project executive or whatever. All the activity from the day on any of my projects, I got an email that says this schedule was published today, and here are the statistics. Here's the quality, execution, so forth. So what happens when you upload that schedule into Schedule Validator, you'll notice here that that's a series of updates. Each row there is an update, and the very first column that you see on the right-hand side is the SD score, and it just, you see that quality there. But the next group is what we call progress assessment. So as we mentioned, that the last four parts of the DCMA all have to do with progress. In other words, I'm comparing a previous schedule with my current schedule to determine, how well we're progressing, right? So the next group of KPIs, which you're going to talk about, is deal with progress, comparing to something, right? So once the schedule gets uploaded, in just a couple seconds, I have all these progress. The first one that you see, obviously, those second two columns are the two finished KPIs. One is, how are we doing with contract? In other words, I can go in there and I can go into my project settings and I can say, here's my contract completion date, and here is the activity in the schedule that represents that. So it's tracking, here we are in my contract. That's a very important KPI. Are we ahead on contract time, behind contract time? And then the next one is the project completion. So that the project finish. In other words, I could have a situation, for example, where I'm behind schedule, I'm behind on my contract. So my contract's showing, I'm 25 days behind, but my finish date has been maintaining the last few months. Maybe I got behind early and I haven't received a contract time extension yet for a delay. So I'm tracking those two separately. Those are two important ones. Here's how we're doing in relation to the contract. And here is what's going on with my finish date. If I have a big slip in my finish date, I know that, I know that I need to keep an eye on that. So those are Two, that most everybody wants to see right off the top of, as soon as you upload a schedule. So you can put little charts together about that. That'll show those two components very easy. There's different ways you can show those to show different things. But those are your project completion KPIs. The next four have to deal with additional progress. 4, 5, 6, and 7. 4 and 5 go together. 6 and 7 go together. The 4 and 5, we'll talk about this, goes to the critical path progress. This is actually, a Schedule Validator does a modified version of the AACE MIP 3.3 in doing that. So it looks at the critical path progress, and then it looks at critical path compression. We'll talk about that in a minute. In other words, it looks at, here's where I'm supposed to be on the critical path. I fell behind, but I've made changes to bring the end date back. That's the compression. So it looks at progress and compression on the critical path. And then the next one is execution versus remaining compression. So in other words, here's all the tasks that we were supposed to be performing. How well did we execute those? If we didn't, that means a lot of activities got pushed out, and I'm having to do more work per day in the future, and that's how the compression works. So as far as the critical path progress, this is a very non-technical term. I call it project creep. I tell the story. The scenario I was involved in where I learned this lesson, it's classic. It is classic. And I tell this story all the time, but I had a client, a good friend, project executive, called me one day, and he's like, hey, my project scheduler, my project manager has been telling me we're on schedule for months, month after month after month. We're on schedule. I just got a call from the owner, and their scheduler thinks we're going to finish, 4 to 6 months late. And he said, so, first thing I did, I called my project manager to see what's going on. And the first words out of my project manager's mouth was, I quit. And so, he's like, and they were suckers. And so I got involved, and sure enough, a lot of it was owner-caused delays, but the project manager was just tweaking the schedule to show the end date not moving. And so that, it kind of looks like this, right? Where you're falling behind. You've got, I use an example of A and B and C milestones. And if you break it down into this kind of analysis, you break it down into these two windows. How well are we doing on this critical path analysis? So the modification that we made to the AACE MIP 3.3 is the AAC is very kind of unclear on exactly how that needs to be implemented. So we kind of modified it, and we developed a very clear way to implement it. And it's real quick. It's done in seconds. Once again, it's automated, and it's very easy to use, and it takes the entire schedule into perspective. So the way this KPI does it is it looks at let's say you have a January to a February schedule. You update it or you have a February 1 data date, and you previously uploaded a January 1 data date. As soon as I upload that February 1, it looks at my previous schedule, my January schedule, and it identifies the longest path, and it basically selects the activity on the longest path that should be in progress right now on February 1, right? And it kind of makes that, it's measuring that as if it were a milestone or whatever. And it says, you were supposed to be right here on this, as of this time. And this activity that's supposed to be in progress today is scheduled to finish, 2 days from now, right? So then it looks at it in the current schedule. And if that activity is behind, or that, the work, maybe it's been delayed or it's just fallen behind, whatever, it looks at it and says, you're 13. In this case, It's saying this activity, this switch traffic activity, was supposed to be in progress right now, and it's 13 days behind what it said. It's 13 days behind where you said you were going to be last month. And so then it looks at it, and it says, okay, you're 13 days behind. If the end date didn't move, right, well, then obviously I had to take 13 days out of it, out of my remaining critical path sequence, and that's my compression, right? So, for example, if I had between the switch paving and the end date, I had 100 days previously. Now it's slipped, say 10 days, but my end date didn't move. That means I had to take 10 days out of that remaining sequence somehow, either cutting durations or resequencing tasks. So if I took 10 days out of that, it's very similar to the critical path leap index that DCMA uses, but it's modified strictly looking at that compression window. And it says, if I took 10 days out of it, that remaining 100 days, I had 10% compression, basically, right? And so it simplifies that process. It's done in just a matter of seconds. And it tells me right away. And then if you look at that report, it goes on down. It shows, here's how you fell behind. Here's activity A, B, C, and D. They would, first one fell behind 3 days. Next one fell behind 5. The other one fell behind another 5. That's how you got 13 days behind. And then you can see, hey, you went from 13 to 6. Oh, they cut this duration, or they cut that tie, or whatever. And it shows what they did to bring that back to 0. Very, very easy. But those are two very, very important KPIs. How well are we progressing on the critical path? And then did we compress what we have left on the critical path, right? Because obviously those numbers, the critical path compression has impacts not only on the critical path, but it reduces all the other activity float on average, that same percentage. So those are very important KPIs. So that's 4 and 5. Number 6 and 7 is the execution and remaining work compression. Once again, this is a little modification on DCMA. DCMA has baseline execution index. And it's basically looked at the baseline schedule and your current schedule. And it says you were going to finish this many activities. You were going to finish this list of 100 activities, and you only finished 90 of those, right? So you got a 90% execution. We modified that in the process, through the summit process, and said, hey, you know what? Sometimes there's two things that we modified. Number one, we're doing it window by window, month by month. And we said, we're not going to just do it the baseline. You can do it. You can run the report to the baseline, but we're going to say, hey, last month, and basically the way it works out, if I were to take my schedule from last month and print out a look ahead, right? And it shows on my look ahead that last 30 days or whatever, I was going to start 20 activities, and I was going to finish 25 activities. How many of those activities did I actually start and finish, right? And you add those together. That's what that first little table. In this case, in that last period, I was going to start 32 activities, and I only started 21 of those, right? Very easy. I mean, it's not a complicated analysis, but that's 62%. I was going to finish 27. And of those 27, I only finished 17 of them. And I could see which ones I did that were critical or whatever. And the other modification that we made to the DCMA baseline execution index, was we took into consideration starts as well. DCMA only looks at finishes. We say, well, you know what? A lot of times an activity in a schedule is showing not finished, but it's finished to the point where my successors can start. So we should get, credit on our execution for being able to start some of the successor activities. So that's the second modification that was made for those. And then, as I mentioned, the compression, remaining work compression, it's a real simple calculation, right? And I say it's simple. Let's see if you can understand it when I try to explain it. But it looks at it and it says, obviously if I only executed 62% of the activities start and finishes, that means, 30 or 38% got shoved out, right? Basically went out into the future. And so this one has, compression on it. So the way the compression is calculated, it uses what we call activity days. So if I have 5 activities that are ongoing today in my schedule, if I were to do a slice of today, that's 5 activity days during this period, right? If I have 5 activities going on all week per day, I'd have 20, 5-day work week. I'd have 25 activity days during this week, right? So you can take that per month. If for example, an activity from last week that I was supposed to complete or start and finish last week gets shoved into this week, now I have to work during this same time period. I'm having to work on 6 activities per day as opposed to 5. That's a 20% increase, right? So that's my compression number. And so it's looking at it saying, okay, you've got activities that, sometimes I have a critical path delay that pushes the end date out, and I have negative compression. In other words, now I've got a little more room to work on all of these things. But in most cases, it's like work's getting shoved out, and now I'm going to have to perform more tasks per day. I'm going to need more crews per day out on the job site or whatever it's going to take to do that. So it just basically takes it. It doesn't have to be a resource loaded schedule. It doesn't have to be. It's just using those activity days, and it's saying, here's your compression, which is basically saying I'm going to have to be performing more tasks per day from here or over, for these month by month over the remaining portion of the job. So those are the KPIs. So there's schedule quality, just kind of to catch us up. There's the schedule validation score. By the way, Schedule Validator has a separate quality assessment in there that you can completely customize. You can basically take any quality assessment, scoring method, whatever kind of analysis that you have out there. There's another separate quality assessment that you can completely customize. Schedule validation score is a standard across. So if you give me a schedule to review, I'm going to get the same score that you would get if we both upload it. So there's the schedule quality. There's the schedule status against the contract. There's the over project finish date, which can be separate. Then there is the progress assessments. There is, the critical path analysis, critical path compression, the execution, and remaining compression, right? So those are the 7. The 8th one that Schedule Validator uses in the KPIs is just the percentage of changes. So once again, it's just looking at how many changes you've made, and it gives a percentage of those. And it primarily just looks at, the relationship changes, the percentage of your relation, because that takes into consideration all of your added activities, deleted activities, things like that. Kind of all. If you have relationship changes, it reflects kind of all of that. So it's just a percentage score, just so I can get, it's nothing super scientific at all, but I can look at it. As soon as I upload that schedule, I see that number. If it's 5%, I know I made quite a few changes that month. If it's 10%, I made a lot of changes, right? And so it's just a really quick indicator of whether or not, I'm having to make a lot of modifications, a lot of revisions to the schedule. And so that's the 8th KPI that we look at. What's that percentage number? So that's how you, if you go back to this dashboard here, that's what that is showing you there. So there's the KPIs, the SP score, contract variance, what happened to my finish date, what happened to the critical path. And when you open that critical path report, that's where you see the compression and the critical path together. Same on execution, and then your changes there. Each one of those open up reports in addition to the other reports that are in there. So let me get back here and we'll kind of wrap it up. The idea here, once again, each one of those, for example, execution, we were just talking about that. It's they're really designed to be actionable. I think that's why DCMA uses those, and especially with the modifications that we have. Execution is a great example that tells me how well a project team is planning their work. I mean, that's what it's telling me. Well, most of your project teams just open up the schedule update and they plug in actual starts and finishes and percent completes. They hit F9, schedule it, and they're done, right? Or they'll make modifications. But they don't really take the time to say, okay, what if I were to print a look ahead for this next month, how well does it reflect what we're actually planning on doing, right? And if a scheduler is doing that with the project team, is actually updating the status and then looking at, okay, here's what schedule showing coming up next week, or next month, and you actually work through that, your execution score goes really well. And so that works from, from a contractor standpoint, it gives you, I know contractors that use it as an incentive for their project teams. If they get a certain execution score, the team with the highest execution score gets this, whatever, a new watch or whatever. But it's great for owners. I have one of my friends called me not too long ago. And it's like, man, we have a contractor and we are having the hardest time motivating that guy to get out and get his work done, right? And what I found over the years, one of the best ways to motivate project teams to perform is just through good old accountability, right? And so a good execution score that just says, hey, you only did 50% of what your schedule showed last month. And I've seen it work where, all of a sudden, just from an ego standpoint or whatever it is, and they get shown that they're not scheduling their work or they're not properly scheduling their work. I've seen it motivate. I could show you examples of projects that are just moving along, not very good execution. Everything's real sloppy. And then all of a sudden, once those accountability numbers are just thrown out there, immediately they start planning their work better. And so, and anybody that's been doing this for a while knows how important that is. I'll ask somebody, are you going to start this next week? Oh, no, we're not going to start next week. Well, why not? Well, we can't do that until we do that, until we do something else. Well, then let's tie that in. As soon as you tie it in, all of a sudden everything goes crazy, right? So it's important to be looking ahead and really doing that. That's where that execution score. So that's what I mean by having good KPIs that are very actionable, easy to implement, and very easy to manage and make it actionable. And where charts that you manufacture using those data all of a sudden have meaning, right? Because once again, I get charts all the time. There's so many charts that are really pretty, right? But it's like, what is that telling me? What action can I take from it? So establishing a good set of KPIs for your program is what's going to really help your organization, your program, whether it's capital program or just across the portfolio. It's going to help your projects perform better. 10 key benefits. Your planning and forecasting is going to be more accurate. The accurate critical path identification is a big part of that. Effective progress monitoring. You guys are very familiar with all this. Better communication, dispute avoidance, and on-budget completion. There's a lot of good reasons why you want to do these kind of things. I won't read all those to you. But I will take some time for questions. If anybody has any question. Yes.
Does the schedule validator have a way to measure or analyze near critical paths? And if so, or if it doesn't, do you think that that's a KPI that we've seen as worthwhile measures?
Correct. Yes. The 8 that I showed there those are the 8 ones that are right there as soon as you do it. But you can basically, that Windows analysis that I was showing you that shows, hey, we were progressing on this, here's how we were progressing on the critical path for this period. We're behind where we were, and then we compress this remaining. You can run that on any path in your schedule. So whether it's near critical, any milestone, you can select a milestone and basically do a Windows analysis on any path in the schedule. And they're adding, I know they have the whole flow path thing coming out where you can run that on you can just do it on an overall flow path thing. I don't think that's available yet, but supposedly that's in the near future. But right now you can run it on select any activity into a Windows analysis or but
And if you manually go in there, it doesn't.
what's that?
You have to manually do that. You don't. It doesn't.
You have to manually select the activity.
Yeah.
Say, I want to run it on this milestone, or I want to run it on my dry-in activity. What happened, on that? So you do have to manually select which activity that you want to run that path.
Yes. So schedule changes. Does your score get a ding from schedule changes, or is that viewed as a good thing or a bad thing or what?
You know what? It is scored. Let me see if I have it. And I'm not going to take the time to bring out the software.
Well, the reason I ask is I view it as a good thing, not a bad thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This, if you look on the left, there's what's called an SPS, right? And so that's a brand new scoring mechanism. I didn't even cover it today, but that's a schedule performance score, right? So actually just a few months ago at a user conference was the first time that they did it. And they said, okay, out of 100 points, how important is schedule quality? How important is execution? How important is that, if you're slipping on your contract day, how important is when the critical path slip? So they went through all those 8 KPIs and divided that 100 points out between those. And that's how they came up with that schedule performance score. So it's kind of a brand new thing. The changes, you do get dinged, but you could see, in this particular example, that right column, 10% is a lot of changes. And so you'll get dinged. But I think in that SPS score, out of the 100, it's only 5 points. Right? So
well, that's like in the Corps of Engineers spec, they don't want you to make any changes. They don't.
Correct.
Okay. And so it's like there's this notion that you need to be able to build this schedule today in the perfect way for the next year and a half long project.
Right.
You need to select the best sequence for everything today
And never change.
and you haven't really even studied the drawings yet, or not for very long.
Right.
Okay. So that's why I say, no, changes should be encouraged and you should get credit, not dinged, for making, hey, guess what? I thought of a better way to build this, but I'm going to get dinged if I implement. And so, yeah, I was curious about yours, not just.
I'm with you on that. I get involved in projects, or I see projects where they say you can't make changes.
Yeah.
And then 2 paragraphs later says your schedule has to reflect what you're going to be doing out in the field.
And you need to be able to predict that 2 years in advance.
Yeah. Just had one the other day. I'm like, hey, if you'll like change order taken out that my schedule has to reflect what's going on, then I won't make any changes. But no, that's schedule. It doesn't count a lot in the score, but if you make a lot of changes, especially if you're doing it over a period of time, it's just like every month you're just making a whole bunch of changes. Then it will, but it still doesn't count near as much as the others. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is that a list of projects you're showing you, or these?
No, this is just a series of updates.
Series of updates.
Yeah, so this is one project. So this shows me some of my, it shows me my average quality over that top, very, very top is showing my average quality, how many contract days have been added, how many, what's happened to my finish date total, how many days I followed behind. So that's basically showing, in this particular case, it's showing over that project, my critical path has slipped 47 days, but my end date overall has come back 28 days. So that's showing you that I've mitigated and or just resequenced a whole bunch of stuff to, bring up my end date at a lot. And my execution average is not so good. And on an average, I'm making a lot of changes in there.
Is there an enterprise version of this, or is it?
Yes, this is just one project. So all of these KPIs, the dashboard I was showing you here, these are a couple examples. That's a portfolio. Across my portfolio, I can see our average quality across, we set a goal for an organization, and here's how we're doing it. Most of the time, I mean, our organization has been using it for a while, so we maintain a pretty high average. That's our goal. But a lot of times you'll see averages really tick up with companies because, we're in such a new space, right? I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but this space is still really new. There's a lot of new people doing this stuff. And so, quality is becoming, particularly at a portfolio level. I mean, there's quite a few tools now that'll help you do it, but that's fairly recent, to actually have a tool where you can see, here's how we're doing on quality, here's how we're doing on execution. So yes, there is portfolio capability, and there's a lot of different things that go with it too. You can set up risk profiles. You can set up. Now, I get notifications. So based on our standards, I get notice here's projects that, didn't execute very well, whatever.
Are you able to do rebaselining? Would rebaseline still have all the prior information in that?
Yeah, it's real simple to go in and there's a little menu there that says, hey, this is my new baseline, right? So you revise it. Now all your it's really mostly has to do with your reports. Like if I do my milestone report, like your typical narrative shows, here's where my milestones are this month, here's where they were last month, and here's where they were in the baseline, right? So when I change the baseline, that's really the biggest difference that it has is just those reporting functions. Yeah, come by, see it. Todd's here and he can give you a good quick demo. I'll tell you the thing about it, and I've started working with it just because I tell people all the time I'm lazy, and I like something that's quick and simple, right? And so it's a very, very simple tool, and it's very robust. I could dig in and find, I can trace logic, I could do all kinds of stuff in a schedule without ever having to open P6 and import a file. So yeah, come by and take a look. Be glad to show it to you. Thank you.